Hey, Life Group leaders, Pastor Adam here. I hope this video finds you doing well. We are wrapping up our series through the summer on the book of Psalms. And so today we are on Psalm 42 and kind of Psalm 43. So we're going to talk about how this psalm is set up, kind of the structure. Some of that you may want to get into more or less with your group, but I think sometimes as a teacher it's interesting and helpful to know that going in. And then what the psalm is, the content in the psalm, and then we'll talk about ways for you obviously, and your group members to apply that. So, first Psalm 42. There are a lot of manuscripts that have Psalm 42 and Psalm 43 together as one work, one psalm with no division. And so I don't know exactly when it started being divided. I haven't went that far in the context of it, but just know as you look at 42, you can read on into 43. You see the same structure, the same grammar set up there in Psalm 42 and 43. But today we're going to be focusing on 42 because it's what our book is focused on. It's what your group members are going to be looking at. So we're going to focus on Psalm 42 today. So as we've talked about when we started this series on Psalms, there are different kinds of Psalms. So this is a Psalm of lament, specifically of individual lament. And so we see the psalmist writing, and we're going to break that up. I've seen this broken up into 2 or 3 parts. I'm going to address it as 2 parts. It's also helpful to know that the writer is obviously, we'll see in the context is going through a hard time. The writer is distraught, depressed, struggling, and so I think this psalm will obviously meet a lot of our people right where we are. Most Sundays we have anywhere from like 300 to up like 370 adults in our adult life groups. And so out of all those people, there's going to be somebody that's going to hear your life group lesson that's probably struggling, that's probably going through something. So I hope this psalm will be an encouragement to them. And so the first part, we're going to look at 2 parts of this. The first part is going to be Psalm 1 through 5, and then 6 through 11. So verses 1 through 5, and just go ahead and let you know this. A lot of my notes, a lot of the information that I learned from this came from my study Bible and some commentary from John MacArthur. I think he really did a really good job breaking this down, which he usually does. That helps to make it understandable. So the way that he broke this down, verses 1 through 5 describes a spiritual drought, and then 6 through 11 a spiritual drowning. And so 1 through 5 is talking about a spiritual drought, a longing, a thirst. As we see in verse 1, it says, "As a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God." So there's this panting, this longing, this thirst. And so that's illustrated to give the word picture, to give a visual of a deer that's looking for water, that's panting for water, that needs something to drink. And so what the psalmist says is that he is desperate. He is in a drought. He is thirsty. And then we even see in verse 3, he's so desperate that he says, "My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all day long, where is your God?" So there are people asking him, where's your God? Where's your God now? You're going through this hard time. Where is your God? And so he also goes in and talks about in verse 4 that he remembers a time when he praised God, when he worshiped him. He said that he pours out his soul. What MacArthur talks about, this is similar to what Jeremiah Lamentations will talk about, a pouring out of soul, this attempt to voice, to get out this expression to help relieve grief, anxiety, hardship. So there would be an attempt to scream, to pour out, to rip ashes on the head, things like that. And so he's saying he's pouring out his soul, but he's remembering a time when he says that he would lead them in the procession to the house of God with glad shouts and song of praise. a multitude keeping festival. So he's remembering a better time. And so he's explaining what's going on there. And then we'll see this in verse 5, and this is the pattern that we see. He describes what he's going through. So he describes the situation. And then in verse 5, and then we'll later see in verse 11, it's almost like this self-rebuke that happens. He says, "Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God." And he says, "My soul is cast down within me. Therefore I remember you from the land of Jordan and of Hermon and from Mount Mizar." And then so he's saying, it's almost like he's having this conversation with himself. He describes what's going on. And he's like, what's wrong with you? Why are you cast down on my soul? And then he's encouraging himself there. And so you see this happen. There's this grief that's going on. And then we'll talk about that later in the application, what we can learn from that. But I think there's something important that we can glean from that type of self-rebuking. And then you see that pattern go on into verse 43. And then 6 through 10, we see this spiritual drowning. So the writer described feeling far from God in verses 1 through 4. He longed for God. He thirsted for God. Where can I go and find God? And now in 6 through 10, we see something totally opposite. He says there, deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have gone over me. And so now he's describing God's own waves and breakers crashing over him, rolling over him. So the same God that provides life-giving water can also use water in a different way. The same God who provides life, who is our source of life, who is our creator, is also the one who grows us, who can bring. He says that these are from God. He says there in verse 7, "At the roar of your waterfalls and all your breakers and your waves have gone over me. By day the Lord commands his steadfast love, and at night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life." And then he says in verse 9, "I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me?" So he feels like this oppression, these waves of trials are coming to him, but he recognizes that in whatever way this happens, that God is sovereign, God is in control. God, in one way, maybe allows these things to happen, brings them to happen. How that all works, probably another conversation for another day. But he demonstrates a recognition that this is from God. And then he describes God as his rock. Now, when we see God described as a rock, what do we think about with that? It's something sure, right? It's not the house built on the sand. It's not the thing that moves and shifts and breaks down and goes away. God is the rock. God is the cornerstone. And so he says that God is his rock, that our rock is something that's sturdy, it's something that can be trusted. It's the cornerstone, Jesus, that everything is built on. And then we see in verses 3 that we've already looked at, and now verses 10, that there are people who are asking him, "Where is your God?" And so when I read this reminds me of Job, when Job was going through trials. What were his friends? What were the people around him saying to them? "Where is your God?" You can't. So here in the first verses we see you're thirsting for God, you're longing for God. Where's he at? The second part, all these bad things are happening to you. Where's your God? You say that you worship this God. You say he's all powerful. Where are we at? And then where is he at? And then you see in verse 11 again this self-rebuking. He says, "Why is my soul in despair?" He says, "Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God." So he's saying his soul is in despair, he's disturbed, but he needs to wait for God, because the writer recognizes that his presence is the source of life and safety. So the first part, remember we're looking at two parts. First part, 1 through 4, 1 through 5, the source of life. Second part, 6 through 11, 6 through 10, and then 11, safety. So how can we apply this? How can you make this practical for your group? First question, are we seeking life? Ask your group members, are you seeking life? What are you seeking, if not life, and where are you seeking it? Okay, if you're seeking something that can refresh, that can quench the thirst that the psalmist talks about here, where are you seeking that from? Where are you seeking relief from that, fulfillment in that? Are you seeking that from the world? Are you seeking that from comfort in the flesh? We've talked about that in our Roman series, that believers that walk according to the Spirit don't find comfort. They aren't gratified by the deeds of the flesh. So where are your people looking for comfort, relief, a quenching of that thirst? We know that Jesus talked about to the Samaritan woman at the well. He said, if you had the water that I have, that I can give you, this is living water, and the one who drinks this living water will never ever thirst again. That's the water that we should be going to. Jesus said that he is the living water. This water will never run out. It always does what he means for it to do. And then the second question, when we encounter trials, when the waves break over us, when they roll over us, do we blame God when hard times come, or do we ask, what is God trying to teach me? Do we ask, what is God trying to teach me by allowing these waves to crash over me? And so you may have heard me say this before, but sometimes these things come, and obviously God can use everything for his good, for his purposes, and for his glory. But it may be that some things have happened because of something really dumb that you did, and now there's a consequence that comes from that. But in a way that only God can make that work to bring himself glory and to turn you more and more to the image of Jesus. So when you encounter trials, do you automatically, is your default mode to turn to God and say, God, why are you allowing this thing to happen? Or do you ask, what is God trying to teach me by bringing or by allowing these waves, these trials to crash over me? And then I think what we can learn from the end, the last verses in those two sections, in verse 6 and verse 11, what are we telling ourselves? And so you can see the psalmist here demonstrating in this writing this kind of struggle and then this assurance. So what are we telling ourselves? When we're longing for something, when we're thirsty, when we're going through trials, do we preach to ourselves a truth? Or do we tell ourselves things just to make us feel more comfortable or in control? Okay, so ask the question, what are we telling ourselves? And then connected to that is, where are we going to get information that we're telling ourselves? Are we going to the world? Are we going to what man says we should do to make ourselves feel better? Are we just trying to numb this feeling that we have? Or are we really trying to grow more and more into the image of Jesus Christ and seeking what God would say in his word that we should do? So what are we preaching to ourselves? Obviously, connected to that is another question. How can we better keep ourselves aligned with God when he feels far away or when trials come? We focus on him. The more that we meditate on, pray about, read about, talk to people about, listen to other people as they share his word, the more that we have our eyes on him, the more proper our focus is, and it helps keep the things in this world into a proper focus. So what I mean by that is, the hard things that we go through now, whether it's because of our faith in Jesus or whatever it is, if we're a child of God, the things that we have waiting on the other side of eternity for us are so great that these hardships that we go through now are even as bad as they can seem. The worst diagnosis, the worst loss, the worst news that you could get, the good things that await God's children are so much greater. And so, if you can keep that mindset when you go through hard times, when you're longing and thirsting and there's trials coming, when you keep your eyes fixed on God, it keeps things into perspective. And I know in my life, when I let things stress me and I get anxiety and worry over things, it's 9 times out of 10, I can also know that I haven't been spending time with God as much as I should have. Because the thing isn't as big as I'm making it. Now, sometimes it is a really big thing. My devotional that I talked about today was all about fear. And so it's a Paul Tripp devotional. He talked about how we often allow horizontal fear, so that's fear, things that happen on earth, horizontal, to drive our emotions. They create anxiety, they create doubt. And so there's a greater fear that we should choose, and that's a vertical fear, a reverent, a fear of the Lord. When we fear God and worship Him and spend time with Him, it creates a more proper awareness and gives us a proper perspective. And that's what Paul Tripp talks about a lot, is that's what worship does. When you're reading your word, when you're praying, when you're singing songs, when you're doing whatever, when you're worshiping, you are becoming more aligned with what God wants you to do and in a better recognition of who He is. And the more you recognize who He is, how big He is, and how powerful He is, that puts life into perspective. That I may have lost my job, or my child won't talk to me, or my car's broke down, whatever it is. That's a horrible thing that happened. But you know what? I know that none of it took God by surprise. What's God trying to teach me? What's God going to teach me? Maybe even in the middle of the dumb thing that I did. How can God turn this around and use it for His glory? How can God be worshiped and glorified through this thing? So the thirst and trials that cause us distress, that they come into proper focus when we remember who the source of life is, who brings trials, who grows us closer to Him in the image of Jesus Christ. Because at the end of the day, life is not about us never being thirsty. Life is not about us never going through trials. Life is about glorifying God. And so whatever it takes for that to happen, that's what God's about. God is about His glory, as He rightfully should be. And so that's what our life should be about, is about God's glory. Not our glory and not our comfort. So ask your people, are they thirsty for God? Do they long for Him? What are they telling themselves? Are they telling themselves truth? Are they telling themselves lies? Are they focused on circumstances, worldly advice, or are they living in a rhythm of a reverent fear and hope in God? So I hope this psalm first speaks to you. Definitely spoke to me as I've been reading for this video. So I hope it ministers to you. I think we always can use a course correction to get our perspective back on track. And so I hope first that God uses this in your life, and as He uses it in your life, that will allow you to teach this to your people, and it will be an encouragement. So I hope this has been helpful. It's been a fun summer in the Psalms, if you want to call it that. I'm looking forward to our new study that's starting up. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. If you have any questions, or if there's anything that your group needs, or a specific way that I can be praying for you, please let me know. I hope you have a great day. Look forward to seeing you soon. See you later.